There are moments in the life of a universe when something intrudes from beyond its edges. Not through any natural door, not through the careful architecture of hyperspace lanes or the patient mathematics of stellar navigation, but through a wound, a tear in the fabric of reality itself, ragged and burning, the kind of rupture that sends tremors through the Force like a stone dropped into still water. The Jedi, had any been watching, would have fallen to their knees. The Sith would have smiled. The Empire's sensors, scattered across 1,000 star systems, registered only a momentary electromagnetic anomaly, a glitch in the data easily dismissed, quickly deleted from official logs by officers who had learned that unusual readings drew unwanted attention from men in black armor. But the anomaly was not a glitch, it was a door. It had begun, as most catastrophes in the life of the Justice League did, with Darkseid. The Lord of Apocalypse had deployed an experimental boom tube array, not the conventional point-to-point teleportation his forces used routinely, but a dimensional weapon designed to scatter Earth's greatest defenders across the multiverse, strand them, isolate them, remove them from the board while his forces moved on the planet they had dedicated their lives to protecting. The League had tried to destroy the array before detonation. They had almost succeeded. Almost. The resulting explosion had not killed them, nothing so clean, but had instead consumed them in a corridor of screaming dimensional energy, a tunnel through the space between realities, and deposited them somewhere none of their instruments, none of their training, none of their vast collective experience had ever prepared them for. Galaxy far, far away. Superman hit atmosphere first. He came in fast, too fast, even for him, a streak of blue and red that the moisture farmers of the Jundland wastes would later describe as a falling star, if they described it at all. The twin suns of Tatooine blazed overhead, and as Kal-El of Krypton tore through the upper atmosphere, with his cape burning at the edges, he felt something wrong immediately. The solar radiation hitting his cells was familiar in spectrum, but alien in composition. Twin star systems produced a different energy signature than Earth's single yellow sun, and Tatooine's twin suns, older and slightly orange-shifted, fed his Kryptonian physiology at roughly 60% efficiency. He knew it the moment he hit the lower atmosphere and found his deceleration slower than it should have been. Knew it when he hit the sand hard enough to carve a trench 40 meters long and was slow, genuinely slow, climbing back to his feet. He stood in the desert and stared at the sky. Two suns, an alien sky the color of burnt copper, sand stretching in every direction, with the particular indifference of a world that had never concerned itself with the creatures crawling across its surface. He reached for his communication link and found static. He scanned the horizon with telescopic vision, still functional if slightly muted, and saw, perhaps 30 kilometers distant, the rough geometry of structures, homesteads, civilization of some kind. He was alive, he was weakened, he was alone, and somewhere above this planet, in the dark between the stars, he had no idea what had happened to the rest of his team. What had happened to the rest of his team was considerably worse. The watchtower fragment that had caught the dimensional current with them, a piece of the station's outer hull, roughly the size of a transport shuttle, carrying Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Aquaman, Green Lantern, and Cyborg, had materialized in the upper orbit of a green-atmosphered planet that Cyborg's systems were desperately trying to catalog. The planet was Lothal. The atmosphere was breathable. The orbital space, however, was occupied. An Imperial Star Destroyer, the Relentless, had been running standard patrol routes above Lothal when the watchtower fragment appeared, without warning on their sensors. No hyperspace exit signature, no drive signature, nothing that matched any known vessel profile in the Imperial database. Captain Yorick, a precise and humorless man with 17 years of Imperial service behind him, had stared at the sensor reading for 4 seconds before issuing 2 orders simultaneously. Bring it in with a tractor beam and scramble TIE fighters. The TIEs reached them first. Green Lantern saw them coming. The ring on his finger pulsed with emerald light as he constructed a barrier around the fragment. But the construction flickered. The willpower channeling that normally felt as natural as breathing felt strained here, as though the ring were drawing power through gauze instead of open air. The dimensional transit had hit the ring's connection to the central power battery hard. It was functional. It was not reliable. "I've got them," Hal Jordan said, and the shield held for approximately 4 seconds before 3 TIE volleys punched through it, and the tractor beam locked onto the fragment with a mechanical certainty that no amount of ring-generated force seemed able to break. "What is that?" Diana of Themyscira said quietly, watching the Star Destroyer's hull fill their view as the tractor beam dragged them toward an open hangar bay. Her hand rested on the hilt of her sword now, and her eyes were calm in the way that eyes become calm after 1,000 years of war. Not the calm of someone unafraid, but the calm of someone who had learned to save fear for things that actually warranted it. A warship this size warranted it. She filed the feeling away and kept her face composed. Barry Allen had already circled the fragment 17 times in the seconds since the tractor beam locked. "I can pull everyone off before they..." "No." Batman's voice carried the specific weight it always carried in moments like this. Not louder than anyone else's, but denser. Bruce Wayne stood at the edge of the fragment, cape drawn around him against the vacuum that would have killed a lesser man, his cowl's sensors drinking in every detail of the approaching vessel: hull configuration, hangar placement, TIE launch bays, weapon emplacements, the geometry of power. He had been cataloging it all since the moment they materialized. If we run now, they chase us across a planet we don't know, in an atmosphere we haven't analyzed, against weapons we haven't assessed. We let them bring us in. We observe. We find our leverage. "You want us to get captured," Aquaman said flatly. "I want us to get information." Bruce turned from the hangar bay entrance and looked at each of them. "This is not our galaxy. We do not know the rules here. We do not know the factions. We do not know what happened to Clark or how to find him. The fastest way to understand a power structure is to be brought before it. So," he paused, "we let them think they've caught us." Diana's mouth curved slightly. "And if they decide to simply execute us?" "Then," Bruce said, "we stop letting them think that." The hangar bay of the Relentless smelled of ion exhaust and recycled atmosphere, and the particular cold metallic scent of military discipline, a smell Bruce Wayne recognized in his bones despite its alien origin, because armies had smelled the same way since the first army had ever assembled on any world in any galaxy. Stormtroopers ringed them the moment the fragment settled onto the deck. 30 at minimum, weapons raised. Officers in gray uniforms stood back with the studied contempt of men who had been told, in no uncertain terms, that they were the representatives of the most powerful government in the galaxy and should carry themselves accordingly. Barry had already clocked 12 exits. Diana had already identified the structural weakness in the blast doors to their left. The cyborg's internal systems were interfacing, slowly, carefully, trying not to be detected, with the ship's communications network. Arthur Curry stood with his arms crossed and said nothing, because the ocean needed no spokesman and neither did he. And then the temperature in the hangar dropped, not physically. The environmental systems of the Relentless continued their reliable hum, but something changed in the air, a pressure, a gravity that had nothing to do with the ship's artificial gravity plating. Barry Allen felt it like static before a lightning strike and stopped calculating exits for a moment. Diana felt it like the presence of a god she had not yet met. Even Bruce, who felt nothing supernatural because Bruce chose not to. They felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand at full attention. Darth Vader walked into the hangar bay. He was taller than the officers, taller than the stormtroopers, and moved with the total unhurried certainty of a being who had not been afraid of a physical confrontation in 20 years. The rhythmic mechanical breathing preceded him. The black armor absorbed the hangar's light. His presence in the Force was something that defied easy description. A sun going dark, enormous and terrible and cold, the silhouette of a man-shaped wound in whatever invisible energy permeated this galaxy. He stopped 10 meters from the group and said nothing for a long moment. His masked face moved from face to face with the slow deliberation of someone who did not process the world with his eyes first. And what he felt when he reached for these strangers through the Force was something he had not encountered in the 20 years since the Purge. Not Jedi, not Sith, not Force-sensitive in any conventional sense. And yet, the woman with the sword blazed in the Force like a beacon. Ancient power, divine power, something that had no name in any holocron he had ever studied. And the one in black, standing slightly apart from the others, regarding him with calm, dark eyes. Vader reached for him through the Force and found almost nothing. Not a void, not a blank. Just nothing that the Force could catch hold of, as though he existed slightly outside its reach. That one, Vader thought, was dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with the Force. "You will come with me," Vader said. His voice filled the hangar with mechanical ease. "The Emperor has been notified of your arrival. He wishes to know what you are." Bruce Wayne looked at Darth Vader for exactly 3 seconds. "We'd be happy to talk," Bruce said pleasantly. "But first, where are we?" If Vader found the question surprising, the mask gave nothing away. The breathing continued its rhythm. Around them, stormtrooper fingers tightened on triggers. The galaxy, vast and broken and burning under the weight of Imperial rule, turned slowly around them in the dark. The cell block on level 7 of the Relentless was designed for political prisoners, senators whose votes had become inconvenient, rebel operatives whose intelligence value needed to be extracted before their inevitable execution, the occasional Jedi survivor who had made the mistake of surfacing in Imperial space. The cells were clean, efficient, and entirely inescapable by any conventional means. The Justice League was not, in any meaningful sense, conventional. They had been separated upon arrival. Standard Imperial procedure for managing multiple prisoners, eliminating the possibility of coordinated resistance. Diana in one cell, Hal in another, Arthur and Barry in adjacent blocks. Cyborg they had attempted to place in a cell before realizing he presented unique logistical challenges for standard binders, at which point 4 stormtroopers had attempted to restrain him manually, which had gone about as well as could be expected, and he was now in a reinforced containment unit designed for rogue battle droids. His cybernetic systems were already interfacing with the unit's power grid with the patient. Meticulous care of a man who had been part machine long enough to understand that rushing an intrusion always left traces. Bruce Wayne was not in a cell. The moment the stormtrooper escort had moved him toward the cell block corridor, he had been calculating, not hoping, not panicking, calculating. He had noted the security rotation during the walk from the hangar. He had cataloged the guard positions on level 7. He had counted the steps between turbo-lift access points and identified, from the sound of footsteps in the corridor during the first 20 minutes of imprisonment, that the level 7 guard complement was 8, not 12. 4 had been rotated to the hangar bay to manage the watchtower fragment, which meant the block was running understaffed. He had used the first hour to work the cell door's magnetic lock with a tool he had been carrying in a compartment that, Imperial pat-down procedures designed for humanoid anatomy they recognized had entirely missed. The corridor was empty for exactly 45 seconds between patrol rotations. Bruce was through the door in 12. He did not run. Running in corridors attracted attention. He walked with the deliberate purposefulness of a man who belonged where he was, which was a performance he had been giving in boardrooms and Gotham alleys and Batcave war rooms long enough that it required no conscious effort. He reached the cell block control station, neutralized the single technician with the mechanical efficiency of 20 years of combat training, and accessed the prisoner registry. Diana's cell, Block 7C, Hal, Block 7F, Barry and Arthur, 7D and 7E, Cyborg, the reinforced containment unit in the auxiliary block. He began overriding cell locks, but he did not open them. Not yet. He needed more than a cell break. He needed a way off this ship, a way to find Clark, and above all, he needed to understand exactly what kind of galaxy he had landed in. He left the locks primed and ready. Then he accessed the ship's communication intercepts and spent the next 8 minutes reading everything the Relentless had collected. What he learned rearranged the situation entirely. This was not a war between a government and its enemies. This was an occupation, a galaxy of billions of people under the boot of a single authoritarian regime. Its military enforced by terror, its political opposition systematically exterminated, its peacekeeping order, these Jedi, nearly wiped out by an event called Order 66. There was a rebellion, scattered, under-resourced, operating in fragments across the outer rim. And there was an emperor, not a title, not a democratic office, but a man, a single man, who had engineered the collapse of a republic and installed himself as supreme ruler of an entire galaxy. Bruce sat with that for a moment. He had faced tyrants. He had faced dictators, warlords, men who had swallowed cities whole and called it governance. He had never faced anything at this scale. This was not a city to save or a nation to liberate. This was a galaxy, and yet the structural logic was identical. Power consolidated upward, fear as the primary instrument of control, the suppression of organized resistance. Wherever you found that logic, you found the same pressure points. He pocketed the data chip he had copied from the intercept system, relocked the control station, and went to find the rebel signal he had detected in the lower frequencies of the ship's communication sweep. Because there was a rebel cell on Lothal, and they had apparently been watching the Relentless bring in its unusual cargo with considerable interest. On Tatooine, Superman walked. He had assessed his power levels carefully, with the methodical honesty that Kal-El had learned early was the only responsible relationship a being of his capability could have with his own limitations. The twin suns were feeding him, but at reduced efficiency, his solar reserves were at approximately 55% and climbing slowly, perhaps a percentage point every 30 minutes. He was still strong by any human standard. He could still fly, though altitude brought its own complications. In the denser-than-expected lower atmosphere, his invulnerability remained solid, but the precise, surgical application of power that characterized his combat at full capacity, the ability to thread heat vision through a needle's eye, the speed that let him be in 6 places simultaneously, that was diminished. He was operating like a man who had been awake for 30 hours, fundamentally capable but slower, more deliberate, burning reserves he could not immediately replace. The moisture farm he had spotted from the crash site belonged to a family who had, reasonably, bolted their doors at the sight of a man-shaped object streaking from the sky. He did not blame them. He stood outside the homestead and announced himself at a volume calibrated to carry through the door without startling anyone, which was a skill he had developed over 15 years of landing unexpectedly near civilians. It was not the family who eventually emerged. It was a boy, perhaps 12 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that were too old for his age, in the way that eyes became too old on worlds where childhood ended early. He came around the side of the homestead rather than through the front door, and stood looking at Superman with an expression not of fear, but of unguarded fascination, the kind of fascination that adults learn to suppress, and children hadn't yet. "You fell from the sky," the boy said. "I did," Clark agreed. "You're not hurt?" "No." Clark crouched down to the boy's eye level, a habit deeply ingrained. "What's your name?" "Milo." The boy's eyes tracked over the suit, the cape, the emblem on the chest with the focused attention of someone committing details to memory. "You're not Imperial. The Imperials all wear gray or white." "What are you?" Clark looked at the twin suns. 56% and counting. "I'm someone who's very far from home," he said honestly, "and I need to understand where I am. Can you help me with that?" What Milo told him over the next 2 hours, sitting on the homestead's external steps, while the twin suns tracked across the copper sky, painted the picture with the unflinching clarity that only children and people with nothing left to lose could manage. The Empire, the Rebellion, the Jedi, gone mostly, killed in a purge that Milo described with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing weather patterns, because he had been born into a galaxy where the Jedi were already ghosts. The poverty of the Outer Rim, the indifference of Imperial governance to anything beyond resource extraction and military compliance. And one other thing. Milo told him about the Force. He described it the way someone describes a language they've heard all their life but never been formally taught. In impressions, in feelings, in the gaps between words. The invisible energy that connected everything. The thing that made certain people, the Jedi, the Sith, different from others. As Milo talked, Clark found himself listening not with polite attention but with the particular stillness that he reserved for things that genuinely surprised him, because he could feel it, not strongly, not clearly, not the way the boy seemed to when he spoke about it. Milo had the unconscious tells of someone Force-sensitive who had never been trained. And Clark had spent too long reading people to miss them. But there was something, a low hum at the edge of his Kryptonian senses, like a frequency his body had never been designed to receive but was picking up regardless. Something vast and interconnected and alive, threading through the desert and the sky and the stones of this farm and the boy sitting beside him. He filed it away carefully. He had learned, over a very long career, not to assume he understood things he had only just encountered. "The people fighting the Empire," Clark said. "The Rebellion. Where are they?" Milo looked at him with those two old eyes. "Everywhere," he said, "and nowhere the Imperials can find them." Clark stood and looked at the sky. Not the suns this time, but the darkness between them. Where somewhere his team was either captive or fighting, or both. "I need to get off this planet," he said. Milo stood too, and there was something in the straightening of his spine. A decision being made. "My uncle knows someone," he said carefully. "A smuggler. He comes through Anchorhead sometimes." He paused. "He has a fast ship." In the cell blocks of the Relentless, Bruce Wayne had just finished priming the last lock. In the Force, something ancient and watchful turned its attention toward a desert world and felt for the first time in 20 years something that was not quite hope, but was the shape that hope left behind when it had recently passed through a place. On Coruscant, deep in the shielded chambers of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor opened his eyes. "Interesting," Sheev Palpatine said softly, to no one. His yellow eyes were distant, looking at something no one else in the room could see. "Very interesting indeed. The signal Batman had found in the Relentless's lower communication frequencies belonged to a rebel operative named Sena Voss, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had been embedded in the Imperial supply network on Lothal for 3 years and who received the encrypted message Batman sent from the ship's own communication array with the particular combination of suspicion and desperate curiosity that characterized every Rebel Alliance intelligence contact he would ever meet in this galaxy. He had told her with characteristic economy 3 things: that he and 5 others had been brought aboard the Relentless against their will, that they were not Imperial, and that they had capabilities that the Rebellion would find useful if she could get a shuttle to the Relentless's secondary hangar bay on the port side of Level 12 at a specific time. He had not told her what those capabilities were. He had found over the years that specificity in negotiations was a weapon best deployed at the right moment. Cena had taken 40 minutes to respond. The response was 3 words: "We'll be there." Bruce had spent those 40 minutes doing several things simultaneously. He had accessed the Relentless's navigation records and identified the last 3 systems the ship had patrolled, cross-referencing them with communication intercepts to build a rough picture of Rebel Alliance activity in this sector. He had accessed Imperial intelligence files on what they called Force users, both the extinct Jedi and the active Inquisitors that the Empire apparently deployed to hunt any surviving Force sensitives. He had read the file on Darth Vader with the focused attention he brought to reading files on anyone who had the power to kill people he cared about. And he had spent the final 10 minutes in the ventilation access tunnels above the cell block, listening to the conversation Vader was conducting with the Imperial officer assigned to interrogate their group. Vader, it turned out, had not authorized the interrogation. "You will suspend the questioning," Vader was saying, in the flat mechanical voice that Bruce had already cataloged as belonging to a man who was accustomed to giving instructions exactly once. These individuals are not to be harmed, not yet. Their origin is unknown and their connection to the Force is irregular. The Emperor requires them intact. Lord Vader, with respect, standing orders for unidentified. The officer did not finish the sentence. There was a sound that Bruce's audio sensors still calibrated for Earth interpreted as distress. Then silence. "Intact," Vader repeated. "Do you understand?" Bruce had heard enough. He dropped back through the ventilation access, reached the cell block control station, and opened every lock simultaneously. The reunion in the corridor of Level 7 lasted approximately 11 seconds, which was roughly the amount of time it took for the security alarm to register the simultaneous cell block breach. Barry Allen was standing in 5 locations at once before the alarm's second pulse, by disabling stormtroopers with the targeted precision that combat at superspeed allowed. Not killing, never killing, but efficient and thorough. Arthur Curry had taken the door off its hinges with his bare hands and was now wearing it, briefly, as an improvised shield against a blaster volley before discarding it. Diana had her sword out and was deflecting energy bolts with the blade, with an ease that suggested she found the exercise mildly interesting. Hal Jordan's ring blazed back to life in the corridor. The close proximity to his teammates, the urgency of the situation, the sheer weight of his willpower focused to a point, seemed to stabilize the connection, and a construct like a battering ram of green light cleared the far end of the corridor in a single sweep. Cyborg was already broadcasting on every frequency the Relentless used. "Ship systems are mine," he said simply, as his cybernetics interfaced with the vessel's network at a depth and speed that Imperial cybersecurity architecture had not been designed to resist. "I have navigation, weapons, communications, and life support. What do you need?" "Level 12, port side, secondary hangar," Bruce said. "Get us there without triggering the ship-wide lockdown." 30 seconds. It took 28. They found the rebel shuttle, a battered Corellian transport that had seen better decades, and they found Sina Voss with it, who took one look at the group materializing out of the Level 12 access corridor and said, in a tone of voice that walked the precise line between professional calm and absolute astonishment, "I was told there would be 6 of you." "There are 6 of us," Bruce said. "You're not human." "3 of us are," Bruce said. "Roughly. We can discuss it in hyperspace. We need to move." Sina moved. The shuttle broke from the Relentless's secondary hangar under Cyborg's electronic cover. A cascade of false readings across the Star Destroyer's sensor net that made the shuttle read, briefly, as a scheduled maintenance drone departure. And by the time Captain Yorick's bridge crew had sorted out the discrepancy, the shuttle had jumped to hyperspace and was gone. They collected Superman from Tatooine 14 hours later. He was waiting at the coordinates Sina had transmitted through the Rebel network, standing on a landing pad outside Anchorhead, with a boy at his side who watched the Corellian transport set down with wide eyes and showed no inclination to leave. Clark had already told the boy he could not come. Milo had listened politely and remained standing exactly where he was, which Clark recognized as a form of argument he had encountered before, usually from people who later turned out to be right. The League's reunion was quiet in the way that reunions were quiet, when everyone involved understood that the crisis had not ended, merely shifted. They briefed each other. Barry spoke quickly, 3 minutes to cover what would have taken anyone else 15. Diana listened without interrupting. Arthur asked 2 precise questions. Hal's ring pulsed with steady light, the connection firmer now, more reliable, though still not what it had been. And then Sina Voss told them about the Emperor's directive. It had gone out on Imperial channels 4 hours ago. High encryption, maximum priority. A standing order to every Star Destroyer, every planetary garrison, every Inquisitor currently in the field. 6 individuals of unknown origin, possessing anomalous capabilities, were to be captured alive and transported to Coruscant. Descriptions, identifying features. And one additional line that Sina had read 3 times before she believed it: Lord Vader has been dispatched personally to lead the retrieval operation. "He's coming here?" Barry said. "He's already here," Cyborg said, his sensor suite tracking something the transport's own instruments hadn't yet resolved. Through the forward viewport at the edge of the atmosphere, the unmistakable silhouette of an Imperial Star Destroyer was dropping out of hyperspace with deliberate, unhurried purpose. Not the Relentless. This was a different ship, larger, black, the Executor, Darth Vader's flagship, and behind it, emerging from hyperspace, with the slow, theatrical certainty of someone who had not personally traveled to a battlefield in years, but had decided that this particular battlefield warranted the exception. On came a second vessel, a modified Imperial command shuttle, its descent wings folded in the distinctive inverted V configuration that Sina identified immediately, her face going the particular shade of pale that Bruce had learned to read as "This is worse than I thought." "That's the Emperor's personal shuttle," she said. Diana rose from her seat. "Then we end this here." What followed in the skies and on the ground of Tatooine's northern ridge would become part of Rebel Alliance intelligence records described only as the Anchorhead incident, classified at the highest levels, read by fewer than 12 people and disbelieved by most of them. Superman drew the TIE interceptors away from the settlement, 63% power climbing, moving fast enough to pull their targeting locks and slow enough to keep them engaged, threading canyons in the Jundland wastes that the Imperial pilots couldn't navigate and he barely had to think about. Cyborg took the high ground on the ridge and opened a channel to the Rebel Alliance fleet with Sina's authorization codes, broadcasting the Emperor's personal presence on Tatooine. a piece of intelligence that would send shockwaves through every rebel command center in the Outer Rim within the hour. Hal Jordan erected a shield over Anchorhead that TIE laser cannons spent 11 minutes failing to breach. Arthur Curry had no ocean here, no water to command, no advantage his power set was designed for, and fought anyway, with the brutal pragmatic physicality of a man who had trained his body to be a weapon for 30 years. Meeting the stormtrooper ground assault with his bare hands, and a fury that made 3 separate squad commanders call for reinforcements before understanding that reinforcements would not help. Barry kept them away from the civilians, every single one, and on the ridge above Anchorhead, in the shadow of the Jundland wastes, with the twin suns blazing and the sand burning beneath their feet, Wonder Woman met Darth Vader. He came down from the shuttle ramp with his saber ignited, the red blade leaving a heat shimmer in the desert air. Diana had her own blade raised, and when their weapons met for the first time, the impact threw a shockwave of displaced air and force energy outward in a visible ring. Vader was a master of Gemso, aggressive and overwhelming, built around the principle that power applied without pause allowed no room for recovery. Diana had been trained by Ares himself, had fought in every human war for 3,000 years, and possessed the physical durability of a demigod. She did not go back a single step. They moved across the ridge in an exchange of blade work that the Force registered as a screaming dissonance. His dark side power meeting her divine light, not in a clash of equal forces, but in a collision of entirely different cosmologies. Vader pressed. Diana answered. His telekinetic force pushes she absorbed or deflected with her bracers. Her strength, which exceeded even Vader's force-enhanced physicality, drove him back twice, something that had not happened to him in 20 years of absolute dominance, and she could see, in the fractional hesitations between his attacks, that he was recalibrating. She had not won, but she had not lost, and Darth Vader knew the difference. Then the Emperor descended. The shuttle had not landed. He came down on a platform carried by 2 red-robed guards, and the force around him was a different thing entirely from Vader. Not a sun going dark, but a black hole. Everything bending toward him, the air itself seeming to acknowledge his presence. His yellow eyes found Diana first, then swept the battlefield with the unhurried assessment of a man who had maneuvered an entire galaxy into position and knew that another gambit was never more than 1 step away. "Remarkable," Palpatine said softly, his voice carried without effort. "Truly remarkable. The beings from beyond the known galaxy." He descended the platform steps and walked toward them without apparent concern for the battle still raging around him. Stormtroopers and heroes clashing across the ridge, Superman screaming through the upper atmosphere above. "You know, I have waited a very long time for something to surprise me. I had begun to think the galaxy had nothing left." "Surrender your forces," Diana said. Her sword was still raised. "Or we will end this engagement by force." Palpatine looked at her with an expression that was almost paternal. "My dear," he said, "let me show you what this galaxy's version of force looks like." The lightning came from both hands, and it was not the targeted strike of a weapon, but the ambient expression of a power that had spent decades without anything capable of genuinely threatening it. Unrestrained, absolute. Diana caught it on her bracers, and the impact drove her to one knee. The lightning that drove Diana to one knee lit the Tatooine ridge like a second sunrise. She felt it, truly felt it, in a way that almost nothing had made her feel anything in 3,000 years of fighting. Not pain precisely, but pressure. The specific pressure of power that did not originate from any source she had encountered, divine or mortal or metahuman. Palpatine's force lightning was not electricity, not entirely. It was concentrated darkness. the distilled hatred of a philosophy that had weaponized suffering across an entire galaxy, and it hit her bracers with a weight that was as much spiritual as physical. She held. Her arms shook. The ground beneath her boots fractured. The twin suns burned above. And Diana of Themyscira, daughter of Zeus, champion of the Amazons, who had stood on the fields of the First World War and chosen to believe in humanity's capacity for good in the face of every reason not to, planted her back foot and stood back up. The lightning redoubled. She crossed her bracers and released it, not back at the Emperor because she was not him, and this was not how she fought, but outward, in a dispersal that blew sand and stone in a circle 40 meters wide and knocked the red-robed guards off their feet and made Palpatine, for the first time in the engagement, take a single step backward. He looked at her with those yellow eyes, and she saw something there that she recognized because she had seen it on the faces of men who thought themselves gods for millennia, the recalculation of a being who had just discovered that the thing in front of it was more than anticipated. Enough. The voice was not loud. It was not enhanced by any force projection. It was simply Clark Kent's voice, carrying the specific flat certainty of a man who had made a decision and was done negotiating about it. He landed between Diana and the Emperor, 71% power, climbing. The twin suns had been feeding him through 6 hours of aerial combat, and the number was moving in the right direction. Not full capacity, not yet, but enough. He stood in the sand with his cape catching the desert wind and looked at Sheev Palpatine with the particular expression he wore when he had heard all the arguments and rejected them all. The expression that people who knew him well understood to mean that the conversation was over, and what came next was something entirely different. "This ends," Clark said. Palpatine studied him. "You are the anomalous one," he said softly. "The sensors cannot classify you. Even the Force cannot quite reach you." His head tilted. "What are you?" "Someone who's seen your kind before," Clark said. "Different world, same playbook, power through fear, control through suffering, and always," he said, "always convinced that it's necessary, that the order you've built justifies the cost." He paused. "It never does." The yellow eyes narrowed. "You are a long way from whatever world taught you that naive philosophy." "I know." The lightning came again. Both hands, maximum output, everything Palpatine had deployed against Diana and more. Clark did not move, did not brace, did not cross his arms or raise a shield. He stood in it the way he stood in nuclear detonations, not immune to every frequency of energy the galaxy could produce. Not at 71%, but durable enough, absorbing it, his cells drinking the Force lightning the way they drank solar radiation, converting it imperfectly but converting it nonetheless into something his Kryptonian biology could process. It lasted 6 seconds. Palpatine stopped. For perhaps the first time in 20 years, the Emperor's face showed something unambiguously human. Uncertainty. "Impressive," he said, and meant it. What happened next was not a single dramatic exchange, but a convergence. The kind of moment that occurred when 6 people who had fought beside each other long enough to move as a single organism all reached the same conclusion at the same time without a word passing between them. Hal Jordan's ring blazed at full power. The construct he built was not a weapon, but a cage. Enormous, geometrically precise. The product of the most powerful will in the group, focused to a single purpose. And it descended around Palpatine's platform not to injure, but to contain. Barry Allen had disarmed every stormtrooper on the ridge in the time it took the lightning to fade. Arthur Curry had the last squad commander face down in the sand. Cyborg had already transmitted a full record of the Emperor's personal appearance on Tatooine. coordinates, timestamp, sensor data, everything, to 12 separate Rebel Alliance nodes across the Outer Rim. The intelligence value of what he had just broadcast would reshape the rebellion's strategic picture for months. And Vader had not moved. He stood at the edge of the ridge, saber still lit, watching the cage of green light close around his master's platform. In the Force, he was unreadable. A storm with no visible center. Diana stood 10 meters from him with her sword at her side, not raised, not sheathed, waiting. "You felt it," she said quietly. She did not know why she was certain. She was certain anyway. When he used the lightning, you felt something. The mechanical breathing was the only answer. The red blade hummed in the desert air. "He is not what you serve," Diana said. "You know that. Whatever you believed in once, it is not what he built." Still nothing. The black mask turned toward her, then toward the green cage where Palpatine stood still and cold and watching everything with the patience of a spider who had survived worse webs than this. Then Vader looked back at the ridge, at the stormtroopers sitting disarmed in the sand, at the battle that had ended without his intervention. He deactivated his saber. He walked back up the ramp of the Executor's shuttle and did not look back. The shuttle rose without further incident and returned to the Star Destroyer, which held its position in the upper atmosphere and did nothing. No bombardment, no additional deployment. For the 40 minutes it took the Rebel pickup to arrive and extract Cena's cell and the Justice League and the boy who had still not gone home and still showed no inclination to do so. Palpatine they did not capture. Bruce had known they wouldn't. He had never expected to. The cage held long enough for them to leave, which was all it needed to do. Palpatine was not a battlefield prize to be taken. He was a system, a structure, a philosophy embedded in the institutions of an entire galaxy, and you did not defeat systems by caging the man at their center. You defeated them by refusing to be afraid of them and by giving the people under their weight something to organize around. That was, Clark reflected, in the hold of the Rebel transport as Tatooine dropped away below them, perhaps what they had actually accomplished here. Not victory, not defeat of the Empire, not liberation of a galaxy, but something had shifted in the past 24 hours. Something in the texture of the Force, which Clark was not certain he understood, but had spent enough time today half-hearing to respect. Cena had told them during the extraction that the intelligent cyborg had broadcast about the Emperor's presence on Tatooine was already causing chain reactions across the Outer Rim. Rebel cells that had been dormant were signaling activation. Imperial sector commanders, so suddenly aware that their Emperor had exposed himself personally in the Outer Rim and the reports were confused, contradictory, hard to credit, repelled, were reporting morale fluctuations up the chain of command. And somewhere in the deeper currents of the Force, in the ancient interconnected web of energy that threaded through every living thing in the galaxy, something had responded to the clash on the ridge the way a body responds to an unexpected cure with cautious, wary hope. In the ship's small forward compartment, Bruce sat alone with the data chip from the Relentless and a holographic display of the galaxy's political map and worked. Cena had offered to debrief him. He had said he would come find her when he was ready. He was not yet ready. He was mapping leverage points, Imperial supply lines, Rebel alliance gaps, the specific intersection of capability and need that would allow a small group of people with unconventional abilities to have disproportionate strategic impact. He had done this on Earth, city by city, crisis by crisis. A galaxy was, structurally, the same problem at larger scale. Diana sat cross-legged on the cargo deck and spoke with Cena for 3 hours, learning everything she could about the galaxy's history. The Republic, the Clone Wars, the Purge, the rise of the Empire. She listened the way she listened to everything, completely, without filtering for what she thought she already knew, treating each piece of information as something that might change the shape of the picture if placed correctly. By the end, she understood that what they faced here was not a villain to defeat, but a world to mend. And she had experience with that, 3,000 years of it, and she was not afraid of the scale. Hal sat in the back of the hold and held his ring up to the light and felt the connection to the central power battery, distant but present, attenuated across the dimensional barrier, stretched thin but not broken. He had been doing the math in his head since the fight on the ridge. At current drain rates, at the level of use this galaxy was going to require, he had perhaps 3 months before the ring went dark permanently unless he found a way to charge it without the battery. 3 months in a galaxy at war to figure out a solution to a problem no lantern had ever faced. He was Green Lantern. He had the ring. He would find a way. He always did. Barry sat next to Milo, who was eating something Cena had produced from the transport's provisions that appeared to be a ration bar, and was regarding it with the philosophical acceptance of a child who had grown up on moisture farm cooking and understood that food could be fuel without being good. Barry had already run the numbers on the dimensional rift, the return vector, the energy signature, the probability of it reopening. The probability was not 0. It was, however, extremely small and shrinking. The physics of dimensional barriers meant that the longer they stayed in this galaxy, the more stable their presence became within its physical framework, and the less stable the pathway home remained. He had not told the others yet. He would soon. He always told the others everything, eventually. But he was still working through what it meant. What it meant to be the fastest man alive, the man who had always been able to outrun the bad math, sitting with a number he couldn't run away from. Arthur looked out the viewport at hyperspace, the tunnel of blue-white light that the galaxy used to eat the distances between stars, and felt something he had not expected to feel. Recognition. Not of the place, but of the circumstance. He had grown up between worlds, between Atlantis and the surface, between his father's human world and his mother's ocean empire, between belonging and exile. He had spent most of his life being the thing that didn't fit into any single category. This galaxy, strange and vast and broken and alive, with its water worlds and its ocean-covered moons, and the deep force connection that he could feel in the water vapor of the ship's recycled atmosphere. This galaxy was another place he would learn to exist between. It was not the worst thing he knew how to do. Clark sat with Milo as the boy fell asleep against the transport wall and thought about Earth. He thought about it the way he thought about it sometimes on long missions, not with longing exactly, but with the specific awareness of what it meant to be responsible for something. Metropolis was out there, somewhere in a universe that existed in parallel to this one, and the people in it were living their lives without knowing that the sky was missing one of its constants. Perry White was editing copy. Lois Lane was chasing a story. The Jonathan and Martha Kent's farm existed under an Earth sky with one sun. He would do everything in his power to return to it. He believed that. He had to believe it. But the force, he could half hear it around him, threading through the ship, through the stars outside, through the sleeping boy at his side who was force-sensitive and had no idea and had never had anyone to tell him what that meant because the people who would have known were mostly dead. He could hear it the way you heard music through a wall. Imperfect, incomplete, but undeniably present. The galaxy had something to say to him. He wasn't sure yet what it was. He looked out at hyperspace and made the same quiet, private commitment he had made every time the world had asked more of him than he had planned to give. And then he leaned back against the transport wall and closed his eyes, and let the stars carry them toward whatever came next. Because in a galaxy under the weight of empire, in a galaxy where the Rebel Alliance was fighting its impossible war with inadequate resources and too much courage and not enough of everything else, something had changed in the past 24 hours. The Emperor had traveled personally to the Outer Rim and had been turned back. The news would spread, as all news of Imperial failure spread, quietly in encrypted messages, in whispered conversations, in cantinas on 100 worlds, in the eyes of people who had stopped believing that the Empire could be challenged and were now revising that conclusion in the privacy of their own minds. Small moments were the machinery of hope. Hope was the thing the Empire had never been able to fully extinguish, no matter how many systems it occupied or how many voices it silenced, because hope was not an institution or an organization or a fleet. It was a decision made by individuals over and over in the face of everything that argued against it. The Justice League had made that decision for as long as any of them could remember. They would make it here too. Somewhere in the Executor's command chamber, Darth Vader stood at the viewport and watched hyperspace. The Emperor had said nothing during the return journey. That silence was its own communication. Not anger, not yet, but something colder. The deep assessment of a strategist who had encountered an unexpected variable and was determining how to incorporate it into a longer game. Vader was accustomed to being a weapon. He was less accustomed to feeling as he had felt on the ridge when the woman with the ancient eyes had said, "You know that." The specific discomfort of someone who has been accurately read. He did not examine the feeling. He was practiced at not examining feelings. But it was there, small and stubborn, and the dark side did not entirely muffle it. He had more important concerns. The Emperor's game was in motion. The anomalies were free. And somewhere in the Force, threading between the stars at hyperspace speeds, 6 beings from beyond the galaxy were carrying forward an energy that the Force had recognized and was, Vader could feel it, responding to in ways he did not fully understand. The galaxy was changing. It had been changing for 20 years and always in the direction Palpatine chose. This was, Vader thought, a looking at the blue-white tunnel of hyperspace that all journeys eventually ended in. The first time in a very long while that he was not certain that direction would hold. He stood at the viewport for a long time. The Executor flew on. They had come from nowhere, from a tear in the universe itself, from a weapon aimed at their destruction that had instead given them a galaxy to fight for. 6 heroes and 1 dark knight, scattered across the Outer Rim, had found each other against impossible odds, and had stood on the sands of Tatooine against the most powerful man in the known galaxy and had not broken. That was not nothing. It was in fact everything, because the galaxy far, far away had been waiting, whether it knew it or not, for something that the Empire had spent 20 years trying to kill. The proof that its power was not absolute, that somewhere, somehow, something existed that would look at the full weight of its authority and stand up anyway. The Justice League had not saved the galaxy. They had not toppled the Empire or liberated its people or restored the Jedi to their ancient place. The war ahead was long and hard and would demand more from each of them than they had yet given. Clark's power would climb toward full capacity and still find new limits here. Bruce would map the galaxy's power structures and find them more complex than any city he had ever fought for. Diana would carry 3,000 years of war into a conflict that had its own terrible history and its own heroes who had been fighting far longer than she had been watching. And Hal would solve the problem of his ring, or he wouldn't, and the answer would define what he became in this strange galaxy. Barry would tell them the number, the probability that was not 0 but was close, and they would face that truth together, the way they faced everything. Arthur would find his ocean and find his place between worlds again. And in the Rebel Alliance, in the encrypted communications between cells spread across the outer rim, in the whispered news moving at the speed of hope through a galaxy that needed it desperately. Something had shifted. The Force moved between the stars. It remembered what had happened on the ridge above Anchorhead. It kept the memory in the way it kept all things, not in language, not in data, but in the deep, connected tissue of the living universe, in the place where history became energy. The Empire was vast. The road was long, but the Justice League had crossed the distance between universes. The road ahead was just distance. May the Force be with you. More stories await.